I really appreciate you coming in. It's really great to get you on the podcast finally. You're somebody that, is huge within the community. Tons of people that I've already had on the podcast, they follow you, they know who you are. I'm sure they've learned a lot from you. So, kind of getting back to a lot of the roots of the last, maybe 18-ish months of the podcast have been bodybuilding and actually getting into bodybuilding myself, not from a competitive aspect, but from just an interest aspect. Started last Kentucky Muscle, in April or whenever that was in 2022.
The last Kentucky Muscle, which was Brent's last show, that was last September, October.
So the one before that is when I really got into things.
Okay.
So it was the...
that would have been 21 then.
Was
right?
it?
Or are you thinking of the Kentucky Derby or the Muscle? Was it in the fall or was it in the spring?
I guess it was the Kentucky Derby then.
Okay, that's the one in the spring.
Okay. Yeah, that was that one. Right around that show, I reached out to... I'm trying to think who the first person was. One of the first people was Richard Sparks, though. He kind of introduced me into that world. All of a sudden, I'm talking to people that I really had no idea what bodybuilding was, what the divisions were. But I was just soaking in all this information and feeling I kind of get I've never competed, but I get this. I get what these people are all about. I like this. And to me, I don't know if I probably will never compete. But I just love the fact that people are pushing themselves. So.
That's basically the essence of bodybuilding, right? You're pushing yourself to the limits you never thought you could achieve.
Yeah,
that's basically what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. So when did you actually, and how did you actually get into the sport?
Well, for me, I have kind of a stereotypical story in that I got into bodybuilding because I was bullied in school. I went to a rough junior high school. So for me, it was a matter of survival. I was either going to take karate or I was going to do bodybuilding. And I remember thinking, I'd like to look like a bodybuilder. So I started lifting at 13. And the power of what I was doing really became apparent to me when the summer between my 9th grade year and my 10th grade year, I really made good gains that summer. And the bullies started leaving me alone. And that's when I thought, wow, I did this. I did this all by myself. I got to the point where I hated going to school because I didn't know if I was going to be picked on. I got to the point where just due to my hard work and my devotion, I turned myself into somebody who the bullies left alone. And that was when I first understood the power of this stuff.
Did that validate you at all? Or did you feel confident in that? Or did you just more feel finally I'm left alone?
A little bit of both. I mean, the left alone part was really important to me. I mean, being bullied is no fun, right? The confident part, that comes later. I think a lot of bodybuilders who have my background go through a series of events. It's you're not confident, but you're cocky, okay? And then they're not the same thing at all, right? You're cocky. Cocky doesn't come from confidence. Cockiness actually comes from, I think, the opposite of confidence. So a lot of us go through the process where we see our bodies change. And from that, and from the things we learn from changing our body, we start to slowly change our insides as well. I mean, not all bodybuilders do that, as you probably know. Some of them never get beyond the physical. But bodybuilding can be a vehicle for total change. And in my case, I think it was. But it just took me a long time to evolve into that.
And did you see it at the time, taking it up as bodybuilding? Or did you see it more as just I want to get big, or did you even have a bodybuilding influence at that time, or was it just lifting weights?
Yeah, there were several. So, number one, back then, we're talking, I'm pretty ancient, okay? So when I started doing this, there was no social media. It wasn't even on the horizon. We had the bodybuilding magazines, which, you still see them now, but that was the primary vehicle from which we got information. So there were the bodybuilding magazines, which I devoured monthly. At the time, I started, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the current Mr. Olympia. Joe Weider had him plastered all over everything. So, I devoured the magazines. I had a couple of other influences. There was a guy at school who had been lifting weights for a long time, and he had a really nice physique, for, at the time, 14, 15 years old. He had the nice arm with this phallic vein running down his bicep. And so that was an influence. And also, I belonged to the Jewish Community Center, where we would go swimming during the summer. And the man in charge of recreation there, a man named Ken Porco, he was a former pro football player, but he had a bodybuilder's physique. I mean, the man was built. He could have been an excellent bodybuilder if he had wanted to. So I took inspiration from him as well. So those were my primary inspirations, the magazines, my classmate, and Mr. Ken.
What was it like to be in that era with Arnold Schwarzenegger still being in his prime, or being, very, very, very much younger and still influential in the sport like that from a competitive aspect? I mean, he's probably my biggest influence in regards to just like, he's where I went to look up, what should I do? What should I eat? What should I think about this thing?
Primarily, I would see him in the magazines, right? And the goal was to be like Arnold and therefore do what Arnold did, right? So I tried to copy the routines that they had printed in the magazines that he did, which were impossible, right? I mean, unless you have the robust physiology that Arnold had, and unless you're doing the things that he was doing, which at the time I was not, you're not going to make gains like that. And you go along and you work so hard and you get frustrated.
Yeah.
My biggest influence in bodybuilding was Mike Mentzer. Okay. When he came along, and I was still a kid at the time, but when he came along, everything changed. And much of what he taught me, and I actually got to learn from him in person, much of what he taught me, I still apply in terms of training.
Wow.
Not in terms of diet. He was off a lot on diet. But in terms of training, especially if you pay attention to some of the so-called social media influencers in bodybuilding right now, they're all copying Mike Mentzer. They're all copying the high-intensity, low-volume, focus on recovery type of training. And he was doing that 40 years ago. So it's not new.
The workout is an aspect of it. And I think that that's so hard for especially young guys to get, because they see this is what they want to be like. This is what this person's doing. And then you try it and you try it and you try it. And then you maybe tweak it a little bit. And you're like, okay, well, maybe if I do this, or okay, maybe I'll take that into account. And you try all these different things. And I think that that's where people get so frustrated in regards to just like, why am I not, you see those newbie gains, maybe if you're just getting into it. But then after that, you're hitting that wall, you're peaking there, and it's like, what do I have to do to keep going?
And the question becomes, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
I think I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. What am I doing wrong? And unfortunately, that's where, a lot of young people will turn to steroids as their answer, which can help for a while, but they don't work well if your training and meal plan aren't optimized, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the same thing that happened to me. So the story is that I tried to emulate everything that Arnold did because I wanted to be like Arnold. That was my goal. I wanted to be Mr. Olympia. That was my dream. And it wasn't working. And so I met Mike Mentzer at a seminar in Atlanta, Georgia. Arnold was supposed to have given the seminar. That's why I was there. Arnold was I'll tell you, I was competing in the Teenage Mr. America contest, which was in Atlanta, Georgia that year. And that was on a Saturday. The next day, Sunday, Arnold was supposed to give a seminar. So I was like, oh, this is great. I'll do the show and also see Arnold's seminar. Well, that week of the show, it was announced that Arnold had to back out of the seminar. And Mike Mentzer was going to take his place. Now, at the time, I didn't know who Mike Mentzer was. He had just won Mr. America. He wasn't that well known in the industry. I was like, I don't want to see this guy. I want to see Arnold. But when Mentzer started talking, and he started promoting his way of training, and he started asking us, are you guys getting the gains you want training the way Arnold trains? And we were all like, no, we're not. And he would explain why. And it all just clicked, So those are the things that I try to teach the people who come to me. I mean, anybody who works with me, who's maybe worked with other coaches and they come to me, they will tell you one of the first things I do is I cut their volume back. Almost always cut their volume back in their training, and they usually will start growing again.
Because more is always better, right? That's the mindset.
Yeah, for everything, right?
Yeah.
People will do that and screw themselves up in the process.
And so when you start to dive into this, like this world that is completely different than the one that you're kind of basing everything off of, the quote Arnold way, right? And you start to hear this new information. To you, was that like a little bit intimidating at all? Because like, oh wow, I kind of thought it was just this way, this black and white way, and then now there's all this other way. So it kind of opens this door to, well, how many other ways are there? Did that cross your mind at all?
I wouldn't say it was intimidating. To me, it was enlightening. Okay, so I took what I learned, and at the time I was a student at the University of Kentucky. So I took it back to my friends at the weight room there at the University of Kentucky, and we all grew. I mean, everybody just was growing from it. And then this, of course, is when Mentzer's star started to burn bright, and he became like the main guy in bodybuilding. This would have been, the late 70s, early 1980s.
And so when you did start to see those, those gains happen, was there kind of a fear at all of like, well, I've seen this before, is this going to happen again? Like, is the plateau going to happen again? Did that fear ever cross your mind? And then like, well, what am I going to have to kind of like unlocking that next level at all?
Yeah, I remember thinking about that, but I think at that point, I knew that plateaus were inevitable anyway. You just have to figure out how to get past them, or you've reached your genetic potential, maybe.
And at that time in bodybuilding, was the PED usage at all? Was that like something that was talked about, or was that something that is commonly known about, or comparing it to kind of today where it is a little bit more open in regards to what people are willing to talk about? Was it more taboo then? I've heard several different kind of perspectives on that from people.
That's a great question. And since I lived it, I can tell you exactly what it was like back then. Most guys, and I say guys because there really weren't female bodybuilders back then. That developed a little bit later. But most guys, if they were using, they denied it. They lied about it. Definitely they did. Mike Mentzer deserves credit for bringing that to the forefront. He was, to my knowledge, the first person to actually start writing about steroids in the muscle magazines. He would describe what he was doing, or what he claimed he was doing. We don't know for sure. I suspect most of these guys took more than they claimed they did. But he would write in the muscle magazines, and I think each month he would feature a different steroid and talk about it, talk about his use of it, and why he used it or why he didn't, and what it did for him. But it wasn't, well, like I said, most guys would lie. Whereas these days, you assume pretty much that most high-level bodybuilders are using.
Yeah.
And nobody denies that.
And what does that do, going from like complete like denial to finally somebody opening up to it?
I think about some of my contemporaries, some of the people that I worked out with, and reading that from Mike gave them more of an impetus to actually use.
Really?
Because, yes, they saw that, they obviously saw the results that people got from it. And reading what Mike said about it, and then later a few other people, what they said about it, I think gave them more of an impetus to use. I was a little bit different. I'm somebody who was never into drinking, never into drugs. And to me, that early in my life, I didn't want to do anything with steroids. That changed later. But that early in my life, I didn't want anything to do with them. It just didn't fit my vision of who I was as a person, because I didn't do any kind of drugs anyway.
And what do you think it is about, I guess even, going back then, what was it about steroids or just PEDs in particular that people were so, they just didn't want to talk about it? They didn't want to like admit to it. Like, why do you think there was that stigma surrounding them in the first place? If everybody was, or primarily a lot of people were doing them anyway.
I don't know for sure. I suspect that to some degree it's, if you achieve something, you want it to be acknowledged that your work caused that achievement to happen, and you don't want something else to take credit for it. I suspect it's got something to do with that. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
And at the time, they weren't illegal like they are now. At the time, you could go to a physician and they would prescribe steroids for you. There was a doctor here in Louisville who would prescribe steroids to the competing bodybuilders, So you could do that. It wasn't until, I think, the late 1990s that Congress actually outlawed steroids, which I think was ridiculous, but they did.
Yeah, it's weird to me that from the perspective of like a competitor feeling like they wouldn't get that recognition is a little bit weird to me, just because like if you said, well, I don't eat protein, right? And I can do this. But everybody be like, dude, we know that's not true. Or, I don't need to drink water. I don't need to like, even something as weird as like saying I don't even lift weights to look like this. Like, it's weird to think that I would say vital, let's just call it a vital aspect for this conversation. A vital aspect of the equation is just completely like, pulling the wool over for whatever reason. I get it from like the perspective of what you're saying, but at the same time, to me, it's like if it's accepted as like, okay, we're going to just do it in the community, then it's weird that it wasn't just as open as the other elements are.
If you're tired of searching for a coach or trainer, somebody who knows what they're talking about and has experience, make sure you go check out the new Coach's Corner on weightroompodcast.com. You can find quality, qualified coaches to help you achieve your goals, whether that's in bodybuilding or just general fitness. Stop wasting time and start achieving your goals today. The link to the Coach's Corner is down in the description below.
I thought of another reason why that might be the case. So back in the time frame that we're talking about, there wasn't an NPC, which is the current main governing body for bodybuilding, amateur bodybuilding in America. The Amateur Athletic Union, the AAU, ran bodybuilding. Okay, and their standards were a little bit different. They wanted really clean cut people to win titles, especially the Mr. America title, which was probably at the time the most valued title in the world, maybe, okay, to win Mr. America. And to win Mr. America, you not only had to have the physique, you had to have the personality, you had to answer a personality test, you even had to have some athleticism. You had to score points doing athletic activities, okay? And I think also that the people who ran bodybuilding at the time frowned upon steroids. I mean, there was a point at which, bodybuilders weren't using them. 1940s bodybuilders probably weren't. 1950s probably weren't. Probably in the late 50s, that was, I think, when maybe it hit, and more bodybuilders were using it, but they were keeping it secret. Meanwhile, the people who were running bodybuilding wanted it to be as clean cut as possible for various reasons, right? So steroids were probably considered to be not clean cut.
Gotcha.
Right? So I think that had a lot to do with it. And as I'm thinking back, I'm remembering a guy who probably should have won Mr. America multiple times, and he never did, because he was known to be a massive steroid user. The guy's name was Pete Grimkowski. Other oldsters my age would know that name. The man was massive beyond his time. He later became the owner of Gold's Gym Venice, and he started that whole enterprise. But Pete was huge, and the amount of steroids that he was reputed to have been taken was immense, and he never won. Probably partially for that reason. He placed second many times, but he never won.
Wow.
So I think that's part of it too. I think the powers that be at the time thought that steroids kind of dirtied the sport.
Gotcha.
That's another reason why people probably kept it underground.
Right. And do you think that was just because the people who were running the sport at that time were from that older generation of maybe the 40s or early 50s? And so they just saw it that way?
Sure. Absolutely, I do.
And what was it about, in your opinion, someone wanting to start to take steroids in that sport if they weren't commonplace and if that wasn't the aesthetic then? Like, why do you think that started to become a trend?
I'm going to assume because the first people to do it showed noticeable results and everybody else wanted to get the same results. That's what I'm going to assume. I mean, I somewhat know the story about how steroids came to America and all that, but I'm going to assume that's the reason. Over
the decades, do you think that it was that bodybuilding changed from what it started out as, or do you think that maybe people are viewing bodybuilding as something different now versus what it was in the 40s, early 50s, or
yes.
Even the way you describe it even sounded at that point like almost like more like a pageant than it did a what we would think of now as a bodybuilding competition.
I still think it's a pageant. It's a lot of pageantry still, but I think the original bodybuilders, they were truly all about health. Even the ones who were winning titles, these were very healthy men. And if you look, most of the men who were winning bodybuilding titles when all this started in the 30s and 40s, they ended up living pretty long lives. What's happening now?
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of them.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of them die quickly.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of bodybuilding has changed from a health emphasis to a show emphasis. Is that good or bad? It's not for me to say, but that is, I think, a fact. I mean, when you step on stage at a bodybuilding show, even at a local show, you are not the healthiest person in the world. You're not. One of my jobs as a coach is to get my people back to a healthy spot as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But that's what the standards are right now. Back then, they were not nearly as large as they are now, nor as lean.
I think obviously as something gets bigger, you lose a bit of like the spirit of it, or like what it started out as, just from the pure fact that like, okay, maybe more money's involved, and how do we continue to get bigger? Do you think that there is a future where it reverts, or do you think that kind of once you make that turn in history that you can't go back to what it was?
I think that if you compare NPC shows and IFBB shows with the drug-tested shows, like the NGA and the OCB, you see that reversion in the drug-tested shows. They're smaller. They have more of the old-time feel, whereas the NPC shows now are pretty big productions, meant to make a profit. That's not necessarily the case, in my experience, with the drug-free shows. I mean, I will tell you that the very first bodybuilding show I ever saw, I was probably 14 years old. It was either the Mr. Louisville or Mr. Kentucky. It took place at Bellarmine College in the gym, and the show was tacked onto the end of an Olympic weightlifting meet. That's how they did it back then. The AAU would have their Olympic weightlifting meet, and then they'd tack a bodybuilding show at the end of it. So, and bodybuilding then was just one class of men. They get on stage. Didn't matter how old you were, didn't matter how big you were, how small you were, you all competed together. So I think the first bodybuilding show I ever saw at Bellarmine College was maybe 10 guys of various sizes and various builds, competing. And it didn't take very long, right? And then the individual posing took place under a single spotlight. So you'd all be judged standing on the gym floor. And then when it was your turn to individually pose, you'd step onto this dais, which was probably not much bigger than this table here. And you'd have one light above you to highlight your physique, and you'd pose, and then you'd step off. Okay? And now you see what the NPC productions are now. They're much nicer, much bigger, and that's great. I mean, bodybuilding has progressed in that regard, right?
Yeah. Did you see any, or was it maybe not common, but did it ever happen to where people from the first event would compete in the bodybuilding show?
It wasn't uncommon for a weightlifter to also compete in the bodybuilding show. Yeah, I know that happened.
Very interesting. It seems like we have definitely gotten, whether it be bodybuilding or just sports in general, even from a very young age, so specialized. Do you think that in regards to bodybuilding is ever going to be kind of not necessarily from that young of an age, but do you ever see it being more of like, maybe a freshman in high school, maybe age range starting to become more common for starting bodybuilding? Because it seems like now it's more common for maybe you're getting into it when you're in your 20s or kind of on from there. But do you ever see it kind of going back in time, in age a little bit, and becoming more of like a sport where you're building up and you're making that slow transition, and then you finally then get on stage maybe and kind of like it was, I think, more back in the day when you did train for longer and then you stepped on stage. But do you ever see it going from like a young teenager starting that training kind of sport?
I think some people are doing that already. You can kind of see that on social media. Some of these young kids, it seems like bodybuilding is all they do. On my particular team, I have some young folks, not that young, but say 20, who bodybuilding is their sole physical outlet because they want to be as good at it as possible.
How have you seen kind of the industry as a whole change or evolve or shift in the last 5 to 10 years, due to the social media boom and more people seeing it, more people wanting to try it out and that kind of thing?
I don't know if I would phrase it that way, because I've watched this since I've been involved. I've watched the steady evolution of bodybuilding. It's not been in the last 10 years. It's been, over the whole time I've been doing it. Gone from this very insular sport where you were pretty much considered weird if you participated, where, in high school, I didn't know anybody else who did that, And now in high school, there's tons of people doing it, right? And it's just grown and grown and grown. I remember when this would have been in the 1980s, when Sylvester Stallone completely changed his physique, okay? It was very apparent to all of us. The first Rocky, okay, he had a nice physique. It was obvious that he worked out. The second Rocky, too. But when he came out in Rocky 3, totally revamped his physique. He looked like a bodybuilder. Well, that made bodybuilding immensely popular in the media, okay? And people started doing it. So the skyrocketing of bodybuilding took place in the 1980s, and coincidentally enough, that's when the NPC was formed. It all happened together at the same time. Arnold's getting all this celebrity. The NPC was formed. People like Sylvester Stallone was in the media looking like a bodybuilder, and it all just came together. Okay. And that's also when Louisville got its first bodybuilding gym, first really big bodybuilding gym. Okay. And it just all came together then. And I've watched it evolve ever since.
Looking into like the transition there where it does become more popular, was the bigger physique then, maybe not even to like a bodybuilder standard, but did you see at that time just like the average gym goer start to look more towards that, or was it still more niche towards just the bodybuilders? Like, you know, how did just like the average gym goer physique transition, if at all, during that time period? Did it become more bodybuilder style?
I think it did, especially in terms of the definition. Everybody wanted to, be lean and have really great abs and have the lines in the physique. It's not like the average gym goer wanted to be as big as a bodybuilder, but they wanted to be as lean as one.
And how did the growth of the sport continue to affect you as you're, moving into the 80s and so on? Like, was that something where you start to see it as like, okay, this sport has potential for me to actually like have a spot in it at some level?
No, not at all. I was busy raising my kids then, okay, in the 80s and early 90s as bodybuilding was growing. I was a gym rat, okay? I wasn't competing at the time. I wasn't coaching. I had nothing to do with that. My field of my income was completely from another field, okay? But I was paying close attention. I was paying close attention. I knew at some point I was going to get back into competition again, which I did in the 1990s. But again, I was doing something completely different for a living. I wasn't thinking about making a career as a personal trainer or as a bodybuilding coach or anything like that. Kind of happened by accident. I don't have the best genetics for being a big guy. I was never going to become a pro. It's just not in my genetics, but I could get lean because I was willing to do what it took. I would be the hardest worker in the room. I would diet as hard as anybody because the one thing that I could show up on stage with was leanness. And people noticed that, and they started asking me for help. And that's when my business started.
Do you think that mindset of kind of acknowledging your strengths as well as your weaknesses is something that is becoming more rare these days? Because people kind of like, I feel like on social media, you might have like, so you have your following, and if you're a bodybuilder, you're probably following a lot of pros, right?
Right.
And so it's like, oh, well, that person did it, that person did it, that person did it. And so all of a sudden it becomes like, well, everybody's a pro. And then you're looking at yourself like, okay, I've competed for X amount of shows or X amount of years, and why am I not there? And you must think that something is wrong with you, when in reality it's like, well, there's just on another level. Even though it may seem to you like everybody's a professional bodybuilder, they're really not. And I think that a lot of people take it so hard that they might never get there, and a lot of people can't accept the fact, I feel like, that they may never get there.
I think that's true. In some cases it is. On the other hand, because there are so many more categories now and so many more pro cards being given out than there used to be, it's maybe to some, I would never say that getting a pro card is easy, because it's not. But there's just more opportunities for a larger group of people to get a pro card now, right? Whereas before you couldn't. I mean, again, back when I started, there were maybe 10 IFBB pros, period. Arnold, Zane, Colombo, those guys. It was a very rarefied thing to be.
Right.
And now, I mean, if you, like at a big show like the North Americans that were just held, how many pro cards did they give out at that show? I mean, it's a lot. Okay? Yeah. So the opportunities are there. Still, there are some people whose genetics would never allow them to become pros,
Yeah.
Part of my job as a coach is to be real with people. I've had people, can you turn me into a pro in 2 years? And it's like, I got to be honest with you. I don't think you're going to be a pro ever. That doesn't mean you can't be a whole lot better than you are. Doesn't mean you can't do really well at local shows, but that pro stage is a whole nother animal, And right. If you don't have the requisite genetics for that, it's not going to happen.
And does bodybuilding start to lose some of its exclusivity in that regard, because there are so many more pro cards handed out?
It does feel different for the reason that you say. So on my social media, I'm friends with, tons of the current generation of bodybuilders and coaches and judges. But I'm also friends with the old school generation of judges. And to a person, the old school judges dislike so much of what current bodybuilding is, including the fact that pro cards are so much more readily available. Okay. I I mean, they dislike a whole lot of what bodybuilding is, which is one reason why they're not involved in it anymore. So I see that compared to the current crop, which, absolutely loves what things are right now.
When you talk about those older judges, is it just the fact that there's more pros, or what specifically do you see that they don't really like about it?
Okay, the fact that it's more common to be a pro, so it's not as exclusive as it used to be. A lot of the old judges do not like the current standards in posing. For example, really old school, back when I first got into it, the standing front pose was a true standing relaxed front pose. You didn't have your arms out. You weren't really flexing much. You were tight. But now you have these guys with their arms way out, almost looking like they're riding a motorcycle. I won't let my guys do that. That's taking it too far, okay? A lot of guys will step on stage like that because they're trying to show their lats. But what they're not getting is that in doing that, they're ruining the lines of their body. They're hiding their deltoids usually. It's not a good look. So I don't let my guys and gals do that. But the judges complain about the posing standards. The former judges do. They don't like the size at all costs ethos, especially in open bodybuilding. These are the things I see them complain about the most. And then, of course, the drug use. But is the drug use now really more than it was 20, 30 years ago? I don't know.
Yeah.
It may not be, because it was pretty bad back then too.
Yeah, and I think too there's obviously a limit to that. Like your body can only respond to so much of something. So I mean,
yeah, and then you make yourself sick.
Talking about the standards on the posing though, is that something that was changed by the athletes in regards to just like a lot of people started to teach on that and then they just started to do it, and so there almost had to be a transition, or was that a standard changed by the NPC, or where do these changes come from?
That's a good question, and I assume it lies with the judges, but I don't remember when that transition actually took place. I mean, I can think back to when I first started doing this. The guy who ran professional bodybuilding at least was responsible for how the athletes behaved on stage. He was a real old school European guy named Oscar State, and he insisted on you standing a certain way, which basically meant when you were standing from the front, you didn't have your lats spread, but you were tight. When you were standing from the side, you didn't have the twist that they have now. You just stood from the side. He enforced those rules. I don't know when it changed to become like it is now, where everybody is really exaggerating their stances, and not always for the betterment of the physique, in my opinion. I don't know where that changed, but it's up to the judges to enforce whatever rules they have, right?
Right.
So, I don't know where that change happened.
And going back in time, you talk about like Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger being very popular culture icons, right? I mean, there's even today, there's still huge, people know who those people are. Do you see that there's still the potential for that in bodybuilding? Or do you think that everything has almost become so niche and like so algorithmed out that things are just starting to become more about only the things that really you care about? Or do you think there's still like this potential that, Mr. Olympia will be known by people in every household in America?
I don't see that happening right now. I just don't see that happening. I don't know what kind of a shift it would take to make that happen again. I mean, maybe it would be somebody more relatable to the general public, like Chris Bumstead, to make that happen. I mean, when you look at somebody like Big Ramy and you're just an average person, how can you relate to that?
Right.
It's so cartoonish.
Yeah. But
maybe it would come from the, classic physique division where somebody would break through and be that way. I'm also trying to draw a distinction between the media of 30 years ago, which was television, movies, and newspapers, magazines, and the media of now, right? Where if you were a big movie star, if you wanted to see Arnold, you'd go see his movie, right? But now there's so many ways you can pick up the information from your favorite influencer. I think I'm trying to figure out how to say this right. It's almost like the influence is there, but it's almost more in more of a private way, because there you are alone on your phone seeing this influence rather than going to the movies with a whole bunch of people. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Because I have this thought in my head, but I'm having trouble verbalizing it.
No, I think I get what you're saying. There's so many people that I like draw inspiration from now that that it does almost feel like you have a connection and a relationship with them just because they have a podcast and they're big on social media and they post a lot and they share a lot of their personal information. So it almost feels like I kind of know this person. Whereas I don't really feel as much like I know even like I'm trying to think of an actor who I really like. But just any actor that I might, Adam Sandler. If I like Adam Sandler, I'll go watch his movies, Happy Gilmore, all that stuff, right?
Right.
I don't feel like I know him, though. I don't feel like I have this personal connection with him. I feel like he's funny. I feel like he's entertaining. But with social media, people have this opportunity to know what someone's doing at 7:38 in the morning because they posted something on their Instagram story.
It's a totally different way of relating and getting that popularity. I mean, you mentioned Arnold. I mean, we know what he does all the time. He's either at Gold's Gym working out in the morning, or he's feeding his pets, his donkey and his what else? He's got a donkey and a horse or a small horse? I can't remember. Whiskey and Lulu. One's a donkey and one is, plus he's got a bunch of dogs. Who would have thought you'd know that much about somebody that you looked up to?
Yeah, it's very bizarre. I think so many people, bodybuilders included, think that's like a prerequisite almost to being a bodybuilder, is that they have to have this social media presence now, and they have to tell people that they're eating this meal and they're doing this workout and which I think it can be a good thing, but it can also be an obsessive thing.
It can be, and that's led to the rise of everybody, with their tripods in the gym and everything like that, which most of the old school people just hate that, right? I mean, I hear that complaint all the time. I'm fortunate I have my own gym at home. I don't have to deal with it. I work out in private,
Yeah.
But a lot of people at the big gyms in town constantly complain to me about all the tripods out there and all the people filming all their sets and all that.
And even from a perspective of like a Nick Walker, right? Huge following, but he's also very successful. He probably has someone handle most of his social media, but do you think that impacts the way that do you think that impacts his career in any way as far as like the success he may or may not have because he is followed, he is recorded at all times, workouts are recorded, post-workout he might be on a story talking about something. Do you think that impacts success in any way, not necessarily with just him, but just people in general?
I don't see how it can't, right? Especially in the social media world, it's all based on how many followers you have, and you monetize it that way, right? Based on how many followers you have that you can prove that you have, right? So I think that's got a lot to do with it. Now, will it impact his success on stage? Not necessarily, but I'll bet he's got an opportunity to make way more money off stage than he does on stage, right?
And because of that, because of the monetization of a YouTube channel or an Instagram or a TikTok or just even some of the sponsorships that you can get through social media and stuff like that, because you have a big following, does that impact the sport in regards to like how people are willing to maybe push themselves to that last 0.1% versus today? It's like, okay, well, they want it and they know they want it, but subconsciously it's like, if I didn't do this rep right here, I'd still have, $500,000 in the bank at the end of the year. So is it that important?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, back then, bodybuilders made money not so much from the shows, but sponsorships, contracts. Joe Weider used to have contracts and selling training courses and things like that. And there's so many more ways that bodybuilders can make money now due to social media.
And with your athletes, especially the ones that may start to see more and more success, is that something that you can coach them on?
I do a minimal amount of that. So I'll have somebody, I was just talking to somebody the other day who's considering hiring me, a young man who wanted to know about sponsorships. And I said, before you can get a sponsorship, you have to have something to offer. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to have won a show, but you have to be able to prove to the company that you approach that you can sell their product. So you have to be, bodies are easy for them to find. But, do you have a personality that can sell product? Are you willing to work and spend time doing the social media content that they want you to do in order to sell product? That's all they care about, because they can find bodies anywhere.
Yeah.
So, I advise that way, but I'm also not that terribly knowledgeable about social media. That's not in my field of expertise.
And, going back to what you were talking about at the beginning, your story of how you got into it. It reminded me of like a lot of Autumn Cleveland, and she was sitting here talking about how she had this experience of being bullied, and she was, very skinny, and she felt like she needed to be able to defend herself. I just think it's so funny how so many people take this on a broad scale, take this like mental experience a lot of times, and they go and they transform it to just this physical thing.
Well, insecurity is probably the biggest driving factor for success that there is. I mean, almost everybody who's successful in a field gets their inner drive from some type of insecurity, something that they need to prove, whether that's bodybuilding or somebody who's determined to be a billionaire or whatever. You mentioned Autumn, so I coached her for a while. And I have to say that Autumn has like the strongest mind of anybody I know. I mean, she's gotten herself to where she is through sheer willpower as well as hard work. So kudos to her for that.
A lot of people that I talk to talk about they see what they're doing from their own perspective, and it's like, oh man, I'm really pushing myself. I'm really challenging myself, and I think that is where a coach comes in as well.
That is what coaching is, right?
Yeah,
it's to get the most out of people. That's a big part of it. Yeah, I mean, when you're coaching, you are driving people past their perceived limits.
Yeah,
that's a big part of this.
And is that something that was challenging at all for you to, when you first started coaching people, was to be able to do that in a way that was productive?
Yeah, it's something that I had to learn how to do. I mean, for me, the ability to suffer like I did to achieve whatever success I achieved as a competitor, that was just something I did. Nobody taught me how to do it. I just did it. And I assumed, wrongly, that anybody who claimed they wanted to make a similar achievement would have the same drive. It's not always the case. And a lot of people, I think back to a lot of my clients, and they had to learn how to take it to that point, right? Just when they think they have no more to give. And it's like, yeah, you actually do. You actually do.
And do you see that arise more from a physical in terms of training aspect, or do you feel like that's more of the mental? That's
more mental, has to do with dieting. Most bodybuilders love being in the gym. It doesn't take a lot to make a true bodybuilder want to work out hard. Most of them love that, right? The hardest part of bodybuilding is the diet, especially when you are close to a show and we're trying to get that last little bit of stubborn fat off, and you are just freaking hungry all the time. You are hangry all the time, right? And yet you still got to get your cardio in. You still got to get your training in. You still got to make a living. You still have to try to be somewhat decent to the people in your life who love you. I mean, that's the hard part.
And I think what you said about you can't make somebody want it, or you can't give somebody your own will. Sometimes the best coaches aren't the best athletes for that reason, because
I totally agree.
The best athlete in a lot of cases is like very, very gifted, and a gift has to be utilized to achieve too. I'm not saying that they didn't earn it, but when somebody doesn't necessarily have that gift or those genetics, if you will, it's hard to, it's hard to understand, like, because, throwing out bodybuilding, but anything, like when you're born with a certain thing, or you've become accustomed to the certain thing, you just assume that everybody knows what that's like, or everybody has had that experience in their life. And when you throw that out the window, it's like, where do I even, like, what is step one here? Because you think step one is like this level up here, when step one for a lot of people is, way below that.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it's just learning how to have a routine, right? Just learning how to have a routine is step one for a whole lot of people.
And when you first got into coaching, was there a difference between athletes now and then?
I don't think so. I mean, people are people, and people are varied, right? So I think back to the people I coached 20 years ago and the people I coach now, and I still see the same patterns in people, the same mindsets, some good, some bad, some things that need to be corrected and some not. But no, I don't think there's the difference in the way that you're asking.
So you wouldn't say that is there less of that though? Do you think, just in general, when I say less of that, like less of a will to, or a want to do that from a total population? Do you think, or do you think that there's always been and always going to be X amount of people who are willing to push to certain limits in a certain thing.
If you put it that way, I guess I'm seeing more people who are willing to do that now. But again, we're pulling from a larger pool of people who want to do bodybuilding, right? Because there are more categories to do. And bodybuilding is more popular now than it was 20 years ago. So if you phrase it that way, I'm seeing more people. I'm thinking back to the Kentucky State Show, which was two weeks ago, and I had a team of 8 guys, and I didn't have any women in the show, 8 guys. And all these guys, I mean, they just put their heart and soul into this, right? I don't know if 20 years ago I would have had that many people who worked as hard as they worked to get this done.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And talking about the different categories like that, I mean, from your perspective of seeing it go from, like you were talking about, everybody got up there and they competed, right? To what is there now, like 8, 9, something like that total?
Both women
sides?
and men. So men have 3 categories they can compete in, right? It's bodybuilding, classic physique, and men's physique. And then women have, is it 5? So it's bikini, wellness, figure, physique, bodybuilding, and fitness. So they have 6. So that's 9 categories compared to the one that I started with. And then women's bodybuilding was the first women's category.
And what was it like to see that addition and continuing to see those additions? Like, was there a sense of like, is this the right thing to do? Like, was there any of that from you, or just in general at the time, or was it like, oh, cool, we can now add new people in? Like, what was kind of the general sense when all of these things started to get added in? I know it's, obviously not at the same time, but
yeah, I mean, it's been one at a time, right? Ever since, I think, after men's bodybuilding and women's bodybuilding, I think figure was the next category that was added for women. It's been a mix of things. So the purist in me was like, oh God, why are we doing this? Especially when men's physique came along and they weren't even judging legs. It was like, the purist in me was like, oh, this is kind of ridiculous. But now it's kind of developed its own identity, right? And I like it. And of course, the businessman in me likes it because it brings me more clients, right? So it depends on which side you're talking about. I love the addition of figure. And in fact, figure is my favorite female category. I just love that look. I think for a woman, that's a great look, right?
I think it's very athletic.
It's very athletic. It's the traditional bodybuilding frame, the X frame, as we call it, which means, the broad shoulders, the small waist, the sweeped legs. I just really like that look a whole lot. And then physique is nice because it's kind of a smaller version of bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is whatever goes for a woman as far as she wants to take it. And then wellness. It's taken me a little while to appreciate wellness because it's such an unbalanced category, right? It's all about the glutes and the legs. But I see some women who do it very, very well, and I'm coaching some women who are doing it very, very well.
When you see bikini get added and wellness get added, is there a time period for you where you're like, I know that this is going to be different in 5 years. I know it's going to be completely, the posing is going to be different. The level of competition is going to be, just to get to that level of where people have been training long enough to get to that like best physique that you can get to. Because when you first started, I mean, obviously you're going to have people who are just there, but for people to be fully there and more people to be competitive, is there a time frame in that, even if, like, let's say there's a new division or a new, it's something new that comes out tomorrow for you? Are you willing to be like, let's take on clients here? Or is that something where you're like, let me give it time to develop and see what it turns into? What's that for you? Like, whenever?
For me, I take on the client. We just watch the category evolve as it evolves. But,
gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I would take on the client.
Do you see another category? I mean, because it seems like to me, like you said, at the highest level, with open bodybuilding, it's like take it as far as you want to take it kind of thing. And then you have more of obviously a restricted thing as you go into each one of them. But do you see that there is a need for another, maybe on the men's side, another category just to open it up more? Or do you feel like that would put more stress on the sport? Like, are we at a good place now, or is there room for expansion still?
where do you go with another category for men or even for women? I can't imagine what that would be. The categories are still evolving, right? For example, classic physique, they just increased the weight cap for the guys, right? They're talking about establishing weight limits for men's physique. Did you know that?
Yeah, I think I heard that.
I think that's going to happen. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. So they're going to cap off the size for men's physique. And I also heard that they're going to maybe start judging the lower body in that to some degree, okay? So the categories are evolving, just like, when bikini first started. Nobody knew what it was going to turn into, right? Wellness is still evolving, I think. But is there room for more categories? If you go into some of the other organizations, they have other categories. Like they have, I don't even know what you call it. The women come on stage in gowns, and the men come on stage in a tux that's opened. I don't even know what you call it, but I guess that's an evolution into another category. Although I find it hard to distinguish the evening gown category from bikini and the tux category from men's physique, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, at a certain point, you can't keep adding categories, right?
It seems like it just makes it, every time you add something new, it makes it a completely different world of what it was before that transition.
Right.
For the better or worse.
But with the human body, I mean, there's limits to the human body. It's finite. Where do you add another category for men or women to exploit the human body? I don't know where that would be. And then the other thing they've done is they've added what they call the true novice category for first-timers. Okay?
Yeah.
To be distinguished from novice, to be distinguished from open.
The cool aspect to bodybuilding is that I feel like it's very down to earth in a lot of senses. You have people who are huge and, have they're celebrity within the sport, but for the most part, like, people are just willing to chat with you. If you can contact them, then they're willing to message you back.
The thing about the bodybuilding world is most everybody who's involved with it loves the sport so much that they love talking about it. They love sharing it,
This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout.
I was thinking when we were talking about the evolution, you may not be aware of this, figure has evolved since it first started. So when figure first came on the scene, what's it been, 20 years? There were actually 2 rounds to it. There's the round that you see now where they're wearing the 2-piece bikini, but there was also a round where they wear a 1-piece suit, okay? And they got rid of that round, I don't know, it's been a while, maybe 10 years. But so that's another way in which the sport has evolved.
Huh. What was the purpose of the difference in the suits?
I honestly don't know. And I was judging at the time. I judged for 8 years, and I was judging at the time, and I don't really remember what the rationale was for having it. But whatever that rationale was, they obviously decided it wasn't worth it anymore.
Right, yeah. And being a judge for that amount of time, was it eye-opening to you to then, like, be interacting and, like, looking at all these different competitors and seeing what was happening in the sport? Because you're looking at it from a different perspective then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting being behind the scenes in that way, learning how the judging worked, sitting there, being a part of that, and understanding how really hard it is to rig a show, at least on the amateur level. People there's accusations leveled at the judging panel all the time. Oh, it was rigged. It's honestly really hard to do that. The way the criteria works, the way the judging works, it's hard to do that.
And when you say rigged, from a individual, like, panel perspective, or from, like, a here's how we want this to play out from the whole season perspective?
Well, from an individual, like, it's always been, people always make the accusation that, oh, well, that person won because the judges wanted them to win. You hear that sometimes, usually from a sour grapes competitor. But I can tell you, having been part of the judging panel, that would be a really hard thing to pull off. Was
it something that you had a challenge of like being able to see it with your own eyes, but also looking at it through the lens of what they were, the NPC, or of what the criteria was? Was that a hard thing to do at all, or was it kind of built in already?
It was hardest in bikini, and I'll tell you why. because there's such a small degree separating one competitor from another in that division, right? Compared to bodybuilding, where even a lot of times an untrained eye can pick the winner, right? Because there's a pretty big degree of difference between the winner and somebody who places fifth and somebody who places last. In bikini, it's not that easy to see. So getting the criteria down and being able to pick the proper person to win and place in the amount of time that you had. Because again, it's very fast paced. You can't sit there and contemplate. You got to make decisions fast.
Yeah.
You know, that was hard.
Yeah. I've never really thought about it like that because, you know, you hear athletes all the time, well, you only get a very small amount of time on stage. But I guess that's very true from the judging perspective as well, that you have to look at all these people and remember and think. And
you do, and then it makes it even worse when you can't see a competitor's number. You know, so that's why if you attend a show, the head judge is always adamant about making sure that the number is visible. Don't put your number all the way over to the side where we can't see it, because then it hampers the judging. Okay, but yeah, it's a lot.
And in your time of judging, did you ever have any experiences of like this athlete is tampering with this other athlete, or any, you know, trying to just fix the show in any way or anything like that? Or was it pretty much just like from athletic perspective, it's just go in and do your thing?
I don't remember anything like that, like with an athlete getting in the way. I mean, there were a few instances where a competitor nearly fainted on stage and they had to be pulled off the stage.
Interesting.
But nothing like what you mentioned. I've seen people storm off the stage in anger because they felt like they got a raw deal. But again, I can't remember anything else.
And being obviously now in even a different capacity, but still having that experience, do you feel like that is quite an advantage that you do have?
Yeah, I think it gives me a perspective that you wouldn't have if you hadn't judged.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Whenever you do try to, like, you know, talk to new competitors about that, is that something that is pretty eye-opening for them?
I think it is. I hammer posing with my competitors. I mean, we work on it and work on it and work on it. And still, a first-time competitor is often, they're going to make mistakes because they're nervous. But, yeah, that's one of my jobs as a coach, is to work on posing with my people. I work on posing with all my guys. I work on it with most of my women. However, I don't teach bikini and wellness posing because I think those are such feminine. That's such a feminine way to pose. I would rather farm that out to Autumn or somebody, you know.
Yeah.
And then help them fine tune it once they know what to do. But yeah, the posing part is really important. And going back to something you were mentioning a minute ago, a lot of times I will have people ask me, well, how did that person win? Because it seemed like first place they went for definition, and then second place they went for size, and then third place they went for definition again. It's like, no, that's the wrong way to look at it. Okay, they're not looking for a particular trend. They're just judging each body on its own merits. And when you're judging a physique, you're looking at proportion, you're looking at size, you're looking at even development, you're looking at definition, you're looking at posing. There's a lot that you're evaluating. So just because the winner was the biggest guy on the stage doesn't mean the second place is going to be the second biggest guy on the stage. And I think a lot of people have trouble understanding that. Just like they have trouble understanding, well, if that guy won bodybuilding, how did he also win classic? And how did he also win men's physique? Well, because he was the best on the stage at the time representing those categories. And that's a lot harder to pull off at the national level, right? When everybody is much closer to the ideal in their categories. But at a local show, that kind of thing can happen all the time. Okay.
So you're almost looking at it from like you're taking all the averages of what does the posing look like? Well, that's this average for this person. And then what does the, you know, muscle development look like? Or what is the, you know, are they the leanness, or, and then those all kind of get averaged in. And so this person might be, you know, even if they're really lean, well, they don't have great, you know, they're not bigger. So it kind of averages out into like a 75%, whereas...
Yeah, you're doing that in your head, but that's not how the actual scoring works in judging. It's actually very simple. If there's 10 guys on stage, I'm ranking them 1 through 10 based on the criteria that I'm supposed to be judging them by. So the averaging that you're talking about takes place in your head, but not on the score sheets.
Right.
If that makes sense, okay? So again, you're just looking at the people, and it's like, okay, this guy here has the best balance of everything we look for in a bodybuilder. He gets one. This guy here has the second best balance. And that's how it works.
And because of that, do you think that there's ever a bodybuilding world where artificial intelligence becomes the judge, or do you think that it purely has to be done by a human being because you can only, as a human, see really what that is to another human?
I would hate for artificial intelligence to take over because, at the end of the day, this is all about people. People judging people, and artificial intelligence just makes the whole thing seem so sterile to me,
And I think so many people get away or go to bodybuilding because they want to get away from that in a sense. It's such only a human thing, whether you're talking about you're talking about a dog or a lion or whatever, or you're talking about a computer. Like, I don't think any other thing has the capacity to be like, I have all my needs met, but now I'm going to go and like eat way less than is comfortable for me, or I'm going to go and wake up even when I'm tired, or I'm going to like just this idea that you're going to do something that makes you uncomfortable. And I think that's almost the complete opposite, especially of modern technology, of what that has turned into in regards to like excessive comfort and excessive pleasuring. Right. And bodybuilding is almost the complete opposite. It's like you're doing everything against, in some way, what your natural instincts are telling you, because you know you can envision this thing in the future.
You're totally right. I mean, that's the big thing in the fitness space in general right now. Do the hard things, right? So many influencers are talking about that. Do the hard things. If you hate cold, do cold immersion therapy, There's a lot to be said for that. And as you said, bodybuilding, if you approach it correctly, it teaches you that you can do the hard things. Or maybe you learn that you can't do the hard things, but then you should be doing the hard things, right?
Right. Yeah, and you get better at doing them. And
right.
It is an opportunity for a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old to do something that gives them meaning from, not necessarily that their life doesn't have meaning before that, but gives them a different sense of meaning.
How about even older than that? I don't know if you saw my client Stan Bishop, 70.
Yeah.
He's 70 years old, and
it's amazing.
He was just on top of the world. He's so happy to be doing what he's doing, at age 70.
And I think that is what the cool part to me, not being a competitor, but being someone who loves and who's always had a passion for, training and dieting, and not dieting, but nutrition, and all the kind of things that play a role in bodybuilding. I've always had a passion for that, and seeing somebody that still enjoys bodybuilding that is, 50, let's just say 50 plus, like, it shows you that there's merit in that there's a way to do this that can be non-competitive, and it can be more of a lifestyle, and it can still add, value and health and years to your life. And it just, to me, that should, I think that could be such a selling point for the sport of bodybuilding.
I think it used to be, and I think it could come back to that. It was certainly the selling point for me, one reason why I started, and I think it could come back to that.
I'm really hopeful that it does, because I think it has a potential for the individual athletes to even make it what it is. Like, in a world, like going back to social media and the potential of influence, nowadays individuals can really shape how people see things.
Correct.
And it used to be, I feel like, more of, well, what's the narrative that the organization, whether that be bodybuilding or football or whatever, what's the narrative that they want to put out there? But now I feel like we can, as individuals, be like, oh, well, this is my own bodybuilding journey. This is why I do it. This is the benefits, or, these are the things I dislike about it. But you can put that out there. And if everybody's doing that, we can really push forward and do something that is meaningful. And not to say that it's not meaningful without that, but like something that you care about individually, for your own reasons.
I think that there are several coaches in the space who are doing that. They're developing their own distinct identities, as far as what do you want to get out of this? I mean, there are some coaches who push that they will only coach people who desperately want to win. And that's perfectly fine, you know. There are others who push more of the health aspects of bodybuilding. You know, there's the crossover now, the hybrid bodybuilding coach / health coach. You know, that's a big thing in the field right now.
Yeah.
Good and bad both. You know, there are a lot of people doing that who shouldn't be. But there's some of that individualization going on that you're describing.
Yeah.
Right within the coaching industry. I wanted to mention something else that I thought of. We were talking about, you know, bodybuilding making you feel good and changing your trajectory in life. And I'm thinking about this one client of mine who just competed 2 weeks ago. It was his very first show. He hired me when he was 19. He's 20 now. And when he first came to me, it was shortly after a very troubled episode in his life. He had spent some time in jail. And he was obviously looking for some direction. And he hired me. And I got to know him better, and I saw him change. The more he got into bodybuilding, the more he changed. And then prep, because he had to do the hard stuff, and he did it. I mean, he just lit into it, and it changed him. And this young man who was, when I first met him, was a little bit standoffish. I didn't know at first if he was going to work out. Had such a blast at the show 2 weeks ago. You know, did well. Didn't win, but he did well. And at the end of the evening, when he was done, and it was he could go and eat whatever he wanted. I told him, "You're done. You go enjoy your meal." He says to me, "Can I give you a hug?" You know, and it was just a very touching moment. You know, I watched him evolve over the course of the year we spent pre-prep, and then the 5 months we spent in prep, and I just watched him evolve.
That's pretty cool. And everybody has that, you know, their own unique journey. And you talked about the different coaches out there. Do you think that there's almost too much of a lightness in regards to coaching now?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, you see it all the time. After every show, somebody who competed in that show for the first time is now hanging out a shingle and saying, "Hey, I'm taking clients. I'm a coach." You know, it happens all the time. It's been happening for decades, right? Yeah. But the good thing is these people are weeded out pretty quickly. You know, they can't get it done. People are paying them money. They don't last long. There's, I think, a fair amount of people who think coaching is way easier than it actually is. They don't know the amount of work you have to put into this to really be good, you know, to really make a good income. And you can make a great income doing this, but you got to put in the work.
And for you, how much of that grind has been from an educational perspective as well?
Oh, a lot of it. I still am learning, right? As long as I've been doing this, I still take classes online to try to learn how to do the things I do better. You know, a lot of what I'm taking now is in the realm of that health coaching that I told you about, because we've learned that certain really stubborn cases, especially in fat loss, which 10 years ago we would like, I don't know what to do for you. We're learning how to deal with those issues, that those issues have more to do with health than they have to do with fitness. And we can solve those issues to a certain degree, right, with the proper education. So I'm still learning. I still spend a lot of money on classes. I read incessantly, you know.
Yeah.
So yes.
Does it blow your mind at all that there is so much more information and so much more scientific research and all this kind of stuff, but there's also just a continual rise in our society for just general unhealthiness?
Yeah, it kind of blows my mind. That's such a dichotomy, isn't it? There's all this information out there about how to be your best self, and yet I think we're becoming a more and more unhealthy society in general, you know. But there's so much information about there, and some of the fixes are so easy. I mean, so many people that I work with, especially your lifestyle clients, their biggest issue is stress. You know, they don't know how to handle stress properly. They don't even really understand what stress is. So a lot of the things I do with my lifestyle clients as well as my bodybuilders is, okay, this is what stress is. You can't avoid stress in your life. And in fact, a certain amount of stress is a good thing. But here's how you make stress work for you, or here's how you control it, or here's how you not let stress control you. And there's various modalities for doing that, right? I think that's huge in terms of fixing ills. Lots of illnesses. So much of that is just stress related.
And, you know, we talked about it a little bit before, but with your clients when you first started, do you feel like that they had a quicker or an easier time jumping off into the sport because general health wasn't at the state that it is now?
Yeah, well, even when there wasn't social media, people were still watching TV late at night.
It's true.
Okay, my best answer to your question is because I and coaches in general are so much more aware of the health aspects of this now. Sometimes we will have our clients go through a health phase. Somebody will come to me and it's like, well, there's certain things we have to do to fix you, to make your body responsive to a prep, right? Whereas, 12, 15 years ago, somebody might have hired me. I want to do a show in 15 weeks. Okay, we'll start prep. A lot of times it wasn't successful. We didn't know why it wasn't successful, but it wasn't successful. Now we know because there were certain issues we had to take care of first.
Right.
So a lot of times people will come to me. It's like, okay, I want to compete in, 4 months. It's like, that's not going to happen. It's not a realistic goal. Here's the reasons why that's not a realistic goal. You can listen to me and we can do the right things and have you compete in the future, or you can find another coach who will be happy to try to put you on stage in 4 months.
And do you see in, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years from now that we're just continuing to learn like even more and more and more in the stuff that we're talking about now, and we're going to be kind of talking about stuff that the same way that we talk about stuff from the 50s or the 70s? Do you continue to just see the trends just be more informational?
I think that's going to be with everything, don't you think? I mean, we're learning more and more about everything, not just health and fitness in the human body, but everything. I don't see any reason why that would stop.
Is there a kind of, even along those same lines, is there a point in time to where it's like, okay, this is the perfect bodybuilder? Do you think that that's yet to come? Do you think that that's just based on standards at the time? Do you think it's hard to judge in different eras? Like, it kind of goes back to like the Jordan LeBron or the Brady Montana or all that kind of stuff. But like, do you still think that the best in regards to what we think of as bodybuilding is still yet to come?
That is such a great question. I assume that it is, but it's not necessarily going to be bigger. I will tell you that in my opinion, the best bodybuilder ever to step on stage, and if he had just been a little bit leaner, he would have dominated the Olympia, was probably Flex Wheeler. He probably had the best bodybuilding genetics ever. It could be argued that Sergio Oliva Sr. also had the best genetics ever, But neither of these guys ever got as ripped as they get now. I don't know, is somebody ever going to be better than Flex, who had every part developed maximally, was round everywhere? He was a perfect physique. He just did not get lean enough.
Do you see that there is a transition from what we look at as because we see bodybuilding and we all think of, like, I think traditionally at least, we think of like the big guys as like the people who we talk about and who we think about. But do you think that there comes a time when people are just like, you know what, that's great and that's an achievement, but we're starting to think more about the best bodybuilder as somebody who maybe looks more into a classic physique style or into maybe even smaller but more, developed in regards to just like the look? Do you think that there's a time that happens, or do you just think that bodybuilding is this sport to where it's the big guys are the dominant guys?
It's going to there's a taste for both, right? So you're always going to have your fans of the bigger the better, and guys will find a way to make that happen. But you're also going to have your fans of the more aesthetic physique as well.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and your experience in the sport.
Thanks.
It's really great to get you on here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if you want to, before you head out, if you want to share your social media or your website or anything like that where people can get in contact with you, you can.
I'm on Instagram as KY Prep Coach 1, and I'm on Facebook as Steve Weingarten. That's all I have. That's the only social media that I have.
Gotcha. Keep it minimal.
Yes, keep it minimal.
That's the best way to stay sane.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.